So, hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar, The Path to Publication. I'm Kylie Hanisch, and I'm the founder of Return to Zero Hope. And I'm excited for these lovely women who have all written their own books to share their experiences of how do you go from writing to publication to marketing, like all these many steps that we may not even know of involved in that. So I just want to introduce everyone briefly, and then they'll go into a little bit deeper details about themselves. But Leah is here, and she is going to be moderating the panel. And Leah just had a book come out this past week. So I'm halfway through reading it, and it's very good, and just I look forward to reading the rest because I know Return to Zero is in the end of it. So, and then Christy Wopat is here, and Christy, will you just wave? And then we have Candace Trinchieri, and she was in another panel with us. That was an author spotlight panel, and Dorienna Alfred also was on that panel, but we're excited to have both of them back, sharing a little bit different aspect of their experience in writing a book. So I guess the only thing I want to add here is if you have questions, comments, put them in the chat, and then we will leave time at the end for the authors to answer those. So Leah, I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Sure, and thank you so much for hosting us, Kylie. I'm a Return to Zero alumni, and I've also been a facilitator at one of the magical retreats that Kylie hosts. And really happy to have a group of writers here today to talk to you about how they were able to get their books published. We'll talk about the good experiences, the bad, the funny things. And really excited and grateful that, we have this platform and ability to talk to you about how to do it if you're also considering writing a book about your baby. So what I wanted to do today is first we'll start with an introduction. So I thought it would be nice to hear from each author, and they are going to share a brief passage from their work, as well as a little bit about themselves as well before we get into the Q&A. If you have any questions that come up, feel free to plug it into the group chat. What we'll be doing right now, we're just sharing our names as well as book titles in case you'd like to reference it at any point during the call. But feel free, it's going to be interactive where we'll be adding in your questions at the end. So feel free to ask away. We're literally open books. I had to say it. All right, so Christy, do you mind starting? And we're just going to go around and hear from each author.
Hi, absolutely, I can start. First of all, thank you everybody who's out there. I know it can be daunting, but sort of exciting to think about turning your story into something that other people could read or want to read. So congratulations for at least giving it some thought. My name is Christy, and I live in Wisconsin in a small town. I am a 4th grade teacher during the day, and I now have 3 books out. So the one I'll talk about most today is called Almost a Mother, Love, Loss, and Finding Your People When Your Baby Dies. That's a memoir that I wrote. It came out in 2018. I also have a children's book called Always Ours, and it's for siblings of babies who die, giving them permission to remember their sibling. And then just this summer, After All, which is Pregnancy After Your Baby Dies, came out. So anyway, I am going to read a passage. The panelists, we were all talking when we got on about how hard it is to choose the passage to read. So I guess later on we'll talk about why we wrote, but one of the biggest reasons I wrote was because I couldn't find a book that said how I feel. And I was quite often bitter and angry and jealous and all those feelings that nobody wakes up every day like excited to have. So I'm going to read a part that just kind of showcased why I sort of hated the world, I guess. About 5 weeks after the twins died, we were lying in bed and my husband said to me, "So, babe, I really don't want to bring something up that might make you upset, but are you ever planning on leaving the house again? I just don't want you to get that phobia where you can't even take 15 steps outside the house to get the mail." F you, I said. Seriously, where do you want me to go? As irritated as I was, however, after letting his words sink in, I supposed he had a point. I should go get my hair cut, go shopping, see my family. Those are things one should be doing. Before any of that could happen, though, I would need a plan, a procedure for what to do and what to say when I ran into people out and about. Most of the time, I would rush through it and say, "I delivered the twins at 24 weeks, but they only lived for a day." And most often I would get back, "Oh," like literally just that. They would say, "Oh." I daydreamed about making a buzzer that I could push after I would get a ridiculous response, like the wah wah sound when the person doesn't win the car on The Price is Right. "Nope, sorry, incorrect, try again." Other times the person might just stare at me looking uncomfortable, which then made me uncomfortable. So I would jump in and start apologizing for their discomfort. "No, it's fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it." But I was not fine. I could never guess who was safe to tell about my loss because sometimes it wasn't who I expected. I can remember one day, it was the first Father's Day after the twins died, and I went to the mall looking for a gift for my husband. I stopped at one of those kiosks where you can get things engraved, and I decided to buy a keychain with Aiden and Sophie's names on it. As I was filling out the order slip, of course, tears were streaming down my face. This gangly teenage boy who was working said, "Are you okay?" And I choked out, "Those names, they're my baby's names, but they died." He came out from behind the kiosk and awkwardly gave me a sideways hug. And then he said, "You know what? I'm just going to charge you cost for this because this totally sucks. Oh, and you gave them nice names." It was May in Wisconsin, and wet and gloomy spring days were dwindling, and we were getting warm, sunny afternoons. And I decided after speaking with my husband that one thing I could do was a task we had been putting off, staining the wooden deck in our backyard. Our house was a duplex on a quiet street in a small town. It was a starter home, something affordable for two young, just married teachers. Directly behind our house, there lived an older retired couple. They took a walk every night, and when they passed by, they would greet us or talk about the weather. The wife adored our dog, so she would stop and give him a scratch behind the ears and ask us about our babies. On that day, I heard, "Hi, hello, are you home from work, sick? What are you doing here? Is there no school today?" I looked up to see my neighbor crossing the lawn. My cheeks instantly flushed with that burn of knowing I was just about to have to say something awful. I choked out, "I'm home on maternity leave." Her eyes flashed down to my fleshy, still rounded stomach. She looked me right in the eyes, and I could see the wheels grinding in her mind. She was rolling this information around in there, trying to make sense of it. "So you had your twins? What in the world are you doing outside painting your deck? Where are the babies? Are they inside sleeping?" I could see that this did not make sense to her. She was looking around, probably trying to find a baby monitor. Here she was staring at a brand new mother staining her deck. She was trying to make sense of it, I suppose. I mean, what the hell kind of mother of newborn twins would be staining her deck alone with the door shut and no baby monitor? I rose to my feet and said, "Well, they were born, but they died. They were sick and born early and they died." I knew this made her uncomfortable, but I was just too sad that day to try to save her. I wanted her to save me. I looked directly at her, daring her to say something to me. She opened her mouth and then shut it. And then she turned on her feet, dug one foot into the ground, and took off running. This 70-something-year-old woman turned around, and as fast as she could go, she ran back to her house without even looking back. I stood there fuming. How dare she, I thought. Angry tears welled up and spilled over. In those few weeks since the twins had been born, anytime I went anywhere, I had wanted to run. Run from my sadness, run from my anger, run from my pain. And the fact that she, this stranger, ran away from me filled me with rage. Why did she get to run away? Who was the one dealing with the pain? Me. I screamed inside my head. I'm the one whose babies died. And that day, at that exact moment, it hit me. We are so afraid of grief and sadness that people cannot even stand to say it aloud. It makes people so uncomfortable that sometimes they can't even muster up an awful cliche. Grieving the loss of a baby could be so taboo that it's easier to physically turn and run than it is to face the situation.
Wow. So much energy in your reading. I found myself wanting to laugh, wanting to cry. And I think that just hearing you read it too, I get your voice that I feel really carries your text, just jumps off the page, and you just carried us into that moment. So thank you for that energetic reading. It was beautiful. Candace, do you mind going next?
To follow that, wow. And I have to say, I was just nodding so much in agreement with so much of what you said, and kind of thinking how some of it was so similar to some of my experiences too, which is one of the points, I guess, of sharing your stories, that you find yourself in the stories. So hello, everyone. I'm Candace Trinchieri. I'm here from Los Angeles, California this morning. What a pleasure to be here, and always a pleasure to be a part of conversations that normalize talking about grief and loss, because as we all know, it is not talked about, and people literally run away from it. So my book that came out in 2020 was Dream Redefined: The Struggle and Success Through Infertility as a Woman of Color. I am an adoption and infertility advocate. With infertility will come loss, and I was not prepared in any way for all the loss that came through infertility. And all of my losses were very early in my pregnancy. And what I found happens is there's a lot of minimization of that trauma. And I always say it's not the pain Olympics, like loss is loss. And we all feel that very deeply and very personally. So my book was about loss, infertility in general, through the eyes of not just women of color, but typically marginalized groups, and also what loss looks like at different stages, and how we all have a way and try to find some peace in processing that loss. So I'm going to read to you today from my chapter 5, which was specifically about miscarriage. It was the hardest chapter for me to write personally. I actually had to start seeing my therapist again while I was writing it, because I found out that as much as I thought I had moved through it, I had not. And I've actually never read specifically from this chapter, and I'm just going to give a trigger warning. It's specifically about my first miscarriage, and I'm going to kind of skip around in the chapter. So
Thank you.
There is nothing I avoid more than talking about my miscarriage, and maybe that's the problem. Nobody wants to talk about it, so nobody's remotely prepared for it when it happens. But nothing in my life was as painful as the loss of my wanted child. My miscarriage didn't just hurt, it consumed me with pain, disbelief, anguish, and utter devastation. It was a foul and complete disruption of my life, and I didn't know anything could hurt like that. I didn't know how to find a way out of my sadness, and my miscarriage felt like the biggest betrayal my body could make. My heart hurts now, spilling it out here on the page. And for a long time, I felt like I was suffering under the weight of my unhappiness. Time alone does not erase feelings of sadness, and you don't simply snap out of grief and sorrow, then return to being whole. Beginning to heal will take a lot of support and a lot of effort. And looking back, all I remember before the miscarriage was the total and complete elation of being pregnant. I was glowing from the inside out, radiating from every pore with the glory of my pregnancy and the life inside of me. I reveled in every single moment of morning sickness because it was proof of what was happening inside of me. I loved being pregnant. I loved it more than I could adequately express with words. I felt so powerful and beautiful. I was strong and perfectly complete in those weeks. I didn't think anything could go wrong. I'd survived 2 unsuccessful IVF attempts, and now I had success. So I thought in my ignorant bliss that nothing would go wrong because I had done all the hard work and done all the things right. I did my yoga. I took my prenatals. I stopped drinking coffee. I endured acupuncture and all the nasty stuff that went with it. I took the shots. I followed the rules. I had paid the full price of admission to motherhood. It was now my turn to enjoy life. And there's this amazing vividness to the day when it all came crashing down. I remember every step I took and everything I did that day from the moment I woke up. It was December, so the holidays were in full effect, and I went shopping. I remember picking up a vegetarian sandwich with extra avocado for myself for dinner and doing my gentle pregnancy yoga poses that night to stretch and relax. I remember sitting on the bed and settling in to read a book about babies and motherhood. And then I remember feeling something warm and wet in my pajamas. I got up to go to the bathroom, not nervous because I felt no pain. The successful IVF cycle had given me the false sense that I was invincible. I was pregnant. Life was good. I didn't have a sense that anything was wrong. I don't remember what I thought I was going to see, but I never expected to see blood. At first, just a little, and then a rush, and then this constant flow. I can hear the inhuman cry that I made involuntarily. And then that cry turned into a scream. And my husband ran to the bathroom and stared hopelessly frozen in the door. I'm bleeding, I kept crying over and over. There was so much blood. I couldn't get up from the toilet. My husband left to go to the drugstore to get maxi pads. And while he was gone, I stayed on the toilet, holding myself and crying bitter tears of loss and pain, just completely helpless. I was still bleeding at my doctor's office the next morning. I sat in that waiting room knowing I had lost my pregnancy. And even with that knowledge, I was not prepared for the intense pain when the doctor told me that he no longer saw signs of a pregnancy. It was gone. All my hope and my happiness, every dream I had of that child. If the human capacity for love is endless, so is the capacity for pain. I had never hurt so much in my life. My sadness was an endless void, and aside from my wedding day, my first miscarriage was the only time I'd see my husband break down and cry. There are no accurate words for what we lost that day. And that was only my first miscarriage. The difficulty for me in writing a personal reflection on miscarriage is that it still hurts so damn much. Almost a decade later, the wounds are still as fresh and as raw as if it happened yesterday. The hurt is too much and the cut is too deep to look back and reflect objectively on my experience. My grief comes and goes in my life like waves in the ocean. Sometimes I tell my story and not shed a tear. Other times I can't make the words leave my lips before I start to cry. Never hits the same way. Every day I experience my loss differently. Every day I process my loss differently. And there hasn't been some kind of magic moment or event that made my pain stop. I am years later still trying to make sense of the senseless, and that's okay. I don't have to force myself to forget. I don't have to snap out of it. And most importantly, I don't have to pretend I'm always fine. So often, we as women are forced to be strong. It's always so much easier and less messy to say that we're fine than to try to explain the pain. I now know that vulnerability is not weakness. Being honest about what you feel is what gives you strength. So I say in power, I've had multiple miscarriages. Each loss hurt deeply, and I have never been the same again. I am a mother to a son I adopted that I love more than life itself, but I will never forget any of my children that came before him. They were wished for, wanted, and so very loved. They passed on after a brief moment with me, but they were mine. They will always be missed.
Beautiful. And thank you for sharing that chapter. You brought up some really good points about, this idea of the mission to motherhood, and you couldn't have captured it better in a chapter. So thank you for sharing that. I know that you mentioned it was your hardest chapter, and it was really profound. So thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Dorienna, do you mind going next?
I'm gonna try. Boy, wow. I don't know if you've noticed, I've been practicing my breathing as I listen to both Christy and Candace. I hope you are taking deep breaths as you need to, as you're listening. I have been sipping cold water to contrast the emotional heat that I have experienced from listening to my co-presenter story, and my heart is saddened and full at the same time that we have a space to be able to share our pain, and also that we have experienced that pain. So I'm going to do my best to keep us moving along. My name is Dorienna Alfred. I am a psychologist professionally, as well as a certified perinatal mental health professional, and I'm also a birth and bereavement doula. And personally, I have had early miscarriage, a stillbirth, and I have 2 rainbow babies. So my book was really, I think you can see how difficult this was for all of us to engage in this process, though I think clearly we all had a drive and a desire to share our stories. My book is really a compilation of my journals. So on specific dates, and I'm going to share just briefly a couple of dates. It's like literally what was in my brain at that time. So I compiled all my journals and then used scriptures, biblical scriptures that helped me to get through those days, things that gave me encouragement. So it is a Christian based book, and really kind of shares my spiritual journey. So I'm going to just briefly share with you a couple of passages. This is from January 1st, 2007, another year. In this context, this was after the loss of our son, Joshua. Another year has come and gone. So much has happened, both blessings and tragedies, that the end is bittersweet. I miss our son Joshua. The void of his absence is immeasurable in our lives. As the year comes to a close and his due date passed, along with the holidays, we were saddened and overwhelmed by his absence. It is difficult to fathom how we could love someone so much without ever having the opportunity to meet him. I guess the same can be said for our love of Christ. We love him even though we've not met him. May God and his angels watch over our son until we meet again. I often wonder who Joshua would have looked like, whose smile he had. I can imagine what it would have been like to watch him learn to crawl and walk, to see him being swept into the arms of his proud daddy, and most of all, to be showered with the love we all had for him. Although you did not get to experience it, Joshua, I hope you know how very loved you are. By the way, I'm still reading the book of Joshua. From what I've learned, your name is truly befitting of the man-child we believed you would be. And then this other brief passage is from July 16, 2007, and this is after we found out that we were pregnant again. And I was on pregnancy bed rest for both of my subsequent pregnancies. This is July 16, 2007, so the same year. Yesterday, I truly felt as though I had lost my mind and I was a good candidate for some kind of antidepressant. My lower body is still in pain and I walk bent over. I feel isolated and lonely and too depressed to carry on a decent conversation. I was very short with my aunt and sister when they called the other day. I feel disconnected romantically from my husband and guilty that he has the sole responsibility for taking care of me and our household. He doesn't complain and manages to do everything: cook, clean, do the laundry, fix my meals without missing a beat. I have a truly awesome man of God, and I thank God for his strength and love daily. I know it's hard for him, but it seems especially hard for him to see me so depressed. It's hard for me too. I can hardly fathom how God can allow such a joyous occasion to make me feel so much pain. I struggle daily with the fact that my pregnancy is not normal and that I'm not allowed to do what most pregnant women can. My only solace is that this will be our only child, our miracle child, and that God's mercy and grace allowed us this one thing that we have longed for. I thank God for this child who is evidence of his mercy and his grace.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you too for reminding us to, take a moment, take breaths as we're reading through these passages. And I wanted to start with these passages because I think a lot of the times we see a book and it just feels like it's impossible for us to write. But hearing from all the authors here and feeling the emotion and knowing that, writing a book on this topic is an undertaking, but it's possible. You'll still feel emotions. I'll still cry when I read certain passages of my book, but not to be afraid of what it brings up, that you can do it. And I think, thank you all for sharing and just being so courageous. Speaking of courage, I'd like to hear if anyone has ever experienced a setback on their path to publication. So as it could have been in the drafting process when you realized you wanted to write a book, but I'm sure all of you felt this compelling need to tell the story and to tell your story. But did you ever experience any type of setback in the process?
I was going to say I suffered massive setbacks in writing the story. The book actually has the input of a lot of women. A lot of women share their stories with me, and I was able to put their stories in the book. And I remember my editor saying, "We need more of you." And so I was very brave in wanting to make sure that other women had their voice, but I was very hesitant to kind of share my own story and my own pain. And then when I shared it, she would say, my editor would be like, "We need a little bit more. I need you to go more into this. I need a little bit more of you." And that is when I started speaking to my therapist, because I'm like, this is hard. I can't do this. I'm scared to share. And so there's a level of fearlessness, I think, that we have in sharing our stories, because what people relate to, as my therapist was telling me, and what my editor was trying to say, they relate to the vulnerability. They relate to the rawness, because especially in the space of loss, that is sometimes missing. So the more you are willing to share your truth, like Christy was saying, like Dorienna is saying, the more you are willing to share exactly your truth, the stronger your work is. It's not the opposite. The more you are willing to be raw and vulnerable, the more people really connect. But then with that, when you're sharing your truth and it's so raw, there's this fear of, what if people don't like my story? Because it's true. I'm not making this up. It's true. So any feedback is going to feel so personal. And I remember after I'd written it and turned it in, just breaking down and crying, because I'm like, what if it's horrible? And my publisher's like, it's not horrible. But because I was so raw and so open, and there were things that I had in the book that I had not shared with my parents, that I had not shared with my husband, because you're being so open and so raw, it is really scary. But you've got to be willing to go to that scary place, because that is actually what moves your work forward.
To follow up, I had very many similar experiences. When I first started writing, I'm kind of a naive person, and I'm always very like, I don't know, romantical about my views. So I was pretty sure that I was going to be on Good Morning America talking about my book. I was like, this is good. I am for sure gonna make it big, right? And then I went to my very first writing conference, and I sat in a session on memoir, and there was an agent from Simon and Schuster there who said, oh, guess what? Nobody wants to buy your memoir. Like, that was how he opened his session. And so that knocked me down quite a few pegs. And I there were just a lot of setbacks when it came to what did I really want for the publication of this book? What did I view as success? Once I realized I wasn't going to be on morning television, how would I get this story out into the world? And then, you know, I struggled with the raw and vulnerable part. And then I realized after it was published that my helping other lost moms was also hurting the people in my life, because I wrote very candidly about how people were not there for me in my perspective. And my friends and family were kind of like, oh, hey, thanks for like putting us on blast in your book. And so that I feel like a lot of my setbacks have been emotional, where I'm like, oh my gosh, should I have done that? Did I do this wrong? What am I even trying to do? Like, you get imposter syndrome. I'm not trying to tell you all not to write your book. I just want you to expect like these like drastic ups and downs, where one moment you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on a webinar with Kylie Hanish from Return to Zero, the movie. And then like the next day you have like, I don't know, a book signing, and the only person that comes is your mom. So it's really up and down.
Thank you for sharing that. And we do have a question about writing about real people and places. But Dorienna, I saw that you wanted to respond to, so I wanted to make sure we heard your stories about setbacks.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I think Christy really just summed it up very well. And I love that you talked about the emotional setbacks, because I agree, like it was my journal. So first of all, I actually really did not want to share my whole personal thoughts and life with the world, and really felt like spiritually that I needed to do it. So a lot of my struggle was letting the book go. And I think Candace also talked about that, of like, what if people don't like this? Or what if they're like, did she really do that? Did she really say that? And so it was really vulnerable, because they were my raw thoughts. And I thought, well, maybe some people will think this and some people will think that. And so a lot of it, and I didn't have a therapist, Candace. So, and I am a psychologist. So, I should have really thought that part through, because you do need that extra support, I think. And even if it's not a therapist, you need that sounding board. You need someone who is helping you to navigate the emotional parts of it. Now, there were things that I had to encounter because I was self-published, and I knew nothing of the sort. Christy mentioned going to a conference, and I thought, that's the way to go. I think that's a really good way to go. But as a self-published person, it was just really more challenging for me to figure out just nuts and bolts, because I did not have any publishing experience. So I ran into, just some issues. I did eventually get connected with someone who helped me navigate that process. But I think what I struggled with the most was really the emotional. How are people going to perceive this? Did I say something that's going to upset someone? And if that's my truth, how do I just be okay with that? So.
Yeah, good. And that leads us into the next question. So for Return to Zero, I facilitate a writing group. And one of the questions in our latest writing group was, how do you get approval to write about real people and real places? And from my experience writing the book, what I did was if somebody wasn't comfortable having their name in, I would basically, maybe tweak some identifying details. Instead of saying my sister, I would say a relative, things like that to kind of help preserve anonymity as well as, keeping things confidential in terms of describing the hospital. And I also recommended to certain chapters that I was more concerned about. I hired an attorney to vet, and he didn't have to do the whole manuscript. It was just the certain passages I wanted, which helped save on some costs. So it'd be great to hear from a writer on how you navigated this as well.
I can start if that's okay. My publisher did a lot of the vetting for my book, so that was lucky. But I mean, I have had some things pop up, like I wrote about my doctor and my nurse, and I changed their names. I had a lot of fun coming up with their names. So my doctor's name was Dr. Peck, and I was like, Peck is like chicken, which is like Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is like Colonel Sanders. And so I called him Dr. Sanders in my book. Like, I tried to just sort of have fun with it. But, I live in a small town and there are only 2 hospitals and there's only one perinatologist. And so anybody who read it could figure out who I was talking about. And so I had to be very careful about writing things from my perspective, my emotions. I don't say much about things he did, and especially not on the medical side. More of just like, this is how I felt in his presence, which was very bad. I felt very bad in his presence. But I also wrote about his nurse. And the interesting thing about this is his nurse retired from nursing and is now in charge of, I'm blanking on the name of it, but they're the people that send out to hospitals, like, the little like leaf with the dewdrop on it that they put outside your door, resolve to share or something like that. So she's actually the head of that. And one of my main, marketing standpoints was, I'm going to get involved in this program because it's based right here in La Crosse. That didn't happen because she does not much care for me because I was very honest. I didn't say anything bad about her, but she could tell who she was. And I shared my disappointment at some of the ways that we were treated. And so, I mean, that really affected me in the long run, even though I use different names. There's an Anne Lamott quote that's like, if you didn't want me to write about you, then you should have acted better, kind of thing. And it's hard to take that advice. You really have to think about it. You have to think about, like my college roommate realized I was talking about her. She was very angry with me. And I was like, I didn't even say anything bad. I just said how horrible I felt. But people don't, that's terrifying to read about yourself in a book doing something like making a mistake. Mm-hmm. So I just always, my advice to people is always to just really think it through. And there are some things I would do differently today. If I could rewrite Almost a Mother, there are some things I would do differently.
Yeah, thank you. And I think too, when we're thinking about writing about the medical community, I know, like, for instance, no one's going to love the doctor who said, we aren't seeing a heartbeat. Everyone's going to hate that doctor. But when we're thinking about, again, like this idea of working through our emotions, rewriting, can we redirect some of this to how you're experiencing it rather than directing it at the doctor? So it takes time and perspective to be able to go back in your mind writing about that day. Because I ended up working with the editor and really softening things, revising it, and trying to see it from a different angle. Can I write from the perspective? I ended up writing the scene in one of the drafts, just what I imagined the doctor to feel like, just to kind of give that compassion to the community when, as a way to kind of help navigate it, because it is hard. But I think, Chrissy, your input there was really helpful. where we're thinking about, is that an essential character to have? Is that somebody maybe we don't need if it's going to cause some drama? Candace or Dorienna, do you also have anything to add on that note?
Yes, I wanted to say that what I actually did, I never even made up names for like my doctor or my therapist. I just referred to them as my reproductive endocrinologist or my therapist.
Mm-hmm.
But I also let them know that I was writing this book, and there was a passage that I had like about some interactions that we had. Here's the passage. I want you to see it. So it's not that I was asking permission. I was letting them see like what I was writing, and I got like good feedback from both of them. And like you said, it's a way of the perspective. There's one instance where my RE was talking about kind of like another miscarriage that we had, and he broke down in tears in the office telling us. And for me, it was this really beautiful moment that my RE had been so invested in our success as a couple that he was moved to tears. But then I'm thinking for him, it might look maybe unprofessional. So he should know like what I'm writing, and is he okay? And there are no identifying markers, but people still may know. And he was fine with it. And same with my therapist. My therapist had said when I was in there, and she's like, yeah, that's effed up. And that was the exact terminology she used. And I'm like, that was a really wonderful moment for me in her office, because it was effed up what was happening to me, and she voiced it. But then maybe that might sound unprofessional to someone who hasn't been working with a grief therapist. But she was okay with it too. So I don't think, I think if you give people a chance to see the work beforehand, you'll get a much more positive response. And like you said, Christy, it's easy to go back. My husband was upset over something I wrote in there that I did not ask before I wrote in there about him, because I'm like, it's my husband, I don't have to ask. But he experienced loss too, and I should have asked. And when I go back now, I'm like, you know what, I really should have touched base with my husband and my parents, because they were the people closest to me that I never even thought about checking in with them.
Yeah, good. And you mentioned a good practice too of just emailing those who the scene's about and asking. That's always, really good practice too. For my hospital scene, I couldn't even remember the name of some of the nurses and things like that. So, but then thinking, are they essential in the story? How can we tone it down a little bit if needed? But all really good thoughts there. So thank you. And I made my husband read the book for my Christmas present. I'm like, please read this and sign off on it. But good. So I know we're getting a little close on time. So what I wanted to ask was, how did you all get your book published? Dorienna, I know that you mentioned self-publishing. Could everyone share just, what avenue they went, if they were traditionally published, hybrid published, or self-published, and how that looked? Because I think that'll be good.
I can share just briefly about the self-publishing process. I published through Kindle Direct Publishing for my virtual or digital copy, which I did in 2015, and it wasn't until 2019 that I actually did the print copy. The print copy was a whole different ordeal than the digital process, and so I did need additional support with formatting and just things, because I had copy editors who would read through the book and offer feedback, corrections, and that sort of thing. But in terms of actually like formatting and all that, I had no understanding of that. So I was able to really get connected with someone who mentored me through that process, and her help was invaluable. I'm not sure what would have happened or how it would have looked otherwise. But she was, very efficient, helped me kind of get through the process. But there were things I didn't know, like, getting your ISBN and making sure you have your copyright page, like all of those things that were not, they were part of the digital one, but they were essential, had to be in place. Choosing your artwork, making sure, for your cover, just all kinds of things that I really did not think about, because hey, it was enough for me to share my experience and get through that whole process. And then there was the whole publishing and how does that part work. So I think can certainly, self-publishing can be really effective. It has worked well for me, but I think the other part, I'd like to hear from Candace and Christy. I think their experiences were different, but the marketing piece and making sure, like, you wrote this, book, you shared your story, you poured your heart into it. So, but how do people get access to it is another thing. And I did not, again, I just was so proud of myself that I got through okay, I did it. I wrote it. I put it together. But again, it's nice to get through that part, but it also needs to get into the hands of people who can benefit from it. So that was my experience. And honestly, I'm still kind of working through that piece. The person who helped me mentor me through that part talked a lot about social media, and I wasn't even on Facebook. So that was the whole thing. So I really had to work through that process as a self-publisher, and still am working through that since the print copy came out. So Christy and Candace probably have different experiences of that, but that was mine.
Thank you. It's really helpful.
So there, like Leah said, there are 3 different main types of publishing. There's self-publishing, which you just heard about. There's traditional publishing, which is typically known as like the big 5, right? Like these big publishing houses in New York City, like Simon & Schuster and HarperCollins. I did not try to find a literary agent. I have a literary agent now with a middle grade fiction book that I've written. And I just went on submission this week, so fingers crossed for that. But I didn't try to get an agent because everybody told me that my memoir would not sell. I don't regret that necessarily. I think it would have been good for me to give it a try, but I didn't try. So instead, what I did was I went looking for small independent presses. And I really wanted one that was local. And so I ended up with 2 offers, both from publishing small independent presses in Milwaukee. And I did not get an advance for my work, but I also didn't have to pay anything to publish it. So that was sort of like the trade-off for me. The press I went with is a hybrid press. So what that means, if you don't know, is that the writer themselves agrees to invest a certain amount of money in the book, and then will receive different royalties. So I have a traditional, we use that lightly, contract with an independent press, meaning I didn't have to pay any of the money up front, but then my royalties are also really small because they took all the risk on me. And I've used the same publisher for all 3 of my books. But now, like I said, I have an agent and we're going to try to sell it because it's a whole different beast. Like I said, it's for 4th graders and it's fiction. So
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I have a very different experience, but this also goes to show the power of social media. I participated in a documentary several years ago. And from that documentary, I just started really talking about all of the things that were important to me in terms of infertility and loss and adoption on my social media pages. One of the assistant publishers actually saw the documentary and literally slid into my DMs. And she just said, I just saw that documentary. I've experienced something like this myself. Have you ever thought of writing, or have you written anything? And I'm like, I've written some essays, I've written some like magazine articles, but I've never really thought of like writing an actual book. And she's like, let's talk. Let's see what we can talk before I bring it to like my boss. And she and I spoke, and she's like, can you give me, and like a lot in publishing, it's like word count. And she's like, can I have this many words so I can show it to my publisher that we have like an outline of something? And I did that. And the publisher, and it was a very small boutique traditional publisher in Canada. So it wasn't even the United States. It was someone in Canada that was willing to take the risk. I got a very, very small, I'm going to call it a stipend. I'm not even going to call it like a check. I got a very, very small stipend to begin writing. And then I was able to negotiate the royalties that the book was going to get after it was publishing. But it was traditional, but it was not one of those big three. It was a small, like out of the country press in Canada. And like Christy, I now have an agent and I'm now trying to like sell a third book that I'm writing, which is, she said, a completely different beast. So let's do this webinar again in a year and I'll have a whole different experience to share with you. But a lot of it is, there's no right way or wrong way to publish a book. It is the way that it's going to work for you. And you don't have to be on Good Morning America with your New York Times bestseller to have a successful book. You know, I think when I sold 300 copies of my book, I felt like a New York Times bestseller, because that's 300 people that I did not know that were invested in the story. And that's successful to me. You know, the fact that I wrote a book, I feel successful. But what I want to say is never underestimate the power of your voice. Don't underestimate the power of sharing your story as often as you can and where you can, because things like the publisher DMing me, that does happen. People will see your story.
I love it. And I love that we have all different experiences from publishers. I didn't plan it that way, but I'm going to pretend like I did. I too, so I went hybrid. Similar to Chrissy, I heard that, you know, my memoir wouldn't sell, blah, 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 all that good stuff. So I was too like intimidated to find an agent. But what I did find was a lot of lost memoirs on childless were being published under an imprint called Cat Biggie Press. I read about the press, and she also had lost her daughter and then created a hybrid publishing house for lost moms. So I ended up really connecting with her, and it just worked for me. And, you know, there's so many different ways to publish a story and, you know, to kind of be open about it. You know, I think, you know, one day I would love an agent, but, you know, I think it's all different for each story. And as long as you feel supported by your publisher or, you know, by yourself, and you know that you're at least changing the life of one bereaved parent, that's all you can ask for. So I didn't see any questions in the chat. If anything comes up, I'll kind of keep an eye on it. But oh, hi, Kylie. I feel like you just popped in. I loved it. How do you think it's going, Kylie? I know we have a few minutes left. I didn't see anything come in. Did you?
I did not.
Oh, I see Dominique raised a hand.
Dominique, you might have to write it in the chat. Because I think because we're on a webinar.
It might not, yeah. Yeah, feel free, everyone, if you want to plug in your questions into the chat box here.
I just want to comment. I see there's a little conversation going on around husbands. And I just like, with the film, it was very interesting because Sean wrote the script on his own, and he didn't talk to me and he didn't talk to other bereaved families. And then I read it once, and I was pregnant with our third child at the time. And it was interesting because like he remembered some things that I did not, and I remembered some things that he did not. And so what our memory is able to retain is not necessarily the full story. But it's what someone writes is so intimate. It's very interesting. So it is. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I had, a lot of things you said resonated with me in terms of even it was a book versus a film, but it's similar.
Yeah, that's so interesting thinking about memory. I can't even remember certain things from like what happened yesterday, but I'm not seeing the questions coming through in the chat. Is anyone having any luck?
I'm not seeing anything.
Let's see. Oh, wait. So let me see if I see him. Let me allow Dominique to talk, because I saw that I'm able to do this. So, hi, Dominique. I have
Do you
you.
hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, the chat's disabled.
Oh no.
Yeah, so that's why I tried
I
messaging you. No, the chat's disabled, but I just wanted to say this has been so helpful. Thank you all so much for just holding space, and I can imagine the sense of a lot of energy that it's taken for all of you to share little pieces of your heart here. So thank you so much. That's all I wanted to say. I just, because this was really helpful for me, because this has been kind of a theme that has been popping up for me within the past, within the past 2 years specifically, and I have no clue where to even get started. So this has been very helpful to just give me the push that I really needed. So thank you so much.
Oh, good. We're so happy to hear that. Let's see, there's a question, curious about publishing in a literary magazine versus a whole book. I can take a pass at that one. So I got some excerpts from my book that I was working on, ones that were standalone pieces. I would send them out to magazines as I was working on my book. It's a really good way to help get noticed, as well as just kind of gaining credibility too. It's always good to add magazine publications into your bios, submitting it to writing contest, even if you don't get, even if you don't win the contest, you might be named a finalist or a semi-finalist, shortlisted. So send it out there. Same rules apply where, if you're worried about writing about certain people or places, feel free to, kind of tone it back. But you can also work with the magazine on that as well. Would love to know more about getting an agent. Publishing my first book with a publisher, but want to expand. So my agent and writers, if you want to talk about your process there. Christy or Candace?
Sure. So to sell a book to a big publishing house, you have to have 99% of the time you have to have a literary agent. It's like how actors and actresses have an agent to land auditions, right? They don't just let anybody audition. So this is like an agent saying, okay, I like this work enough that I am going to take them on. And to get an agent, you have to do that through something called querying, which is, I think they probably should just call it torture, because I'm not sure that there's a different word for that. But so basically, like, you have your manuscript, you send maybe 10 pages, maybe 30. Every agent, how lucky, has a different amount of pages that they want to see. And some of them want you to email it. And some of them want it as a Word document. And some of them want you to write it in the blood of your ancestors and mail it on a dove. But to get an agent, you have to do what they want. But once you have one, then they can do the same process. So right now my book is on submission, which means that my agent and I have revised it, and now she is querying editors. So somebody who works at Simon & Schuster will get queries from agents, and they will, if they love it, they will take it to their acquisitions team. It sounds impossible, and it's really hard right now. I think it's worth it, but it's really difficult. So when you get started, just remember, don't give up, because it might take a really long time.
All I have to add to that is go into this process with the full understanding that rejection is part of getting published, and it's not personal. It's not, if someone doesn't like your book, it's not that they don't like your story. It could be that book is not right for that house, or that book is not right for that agent. Like, agents specialize in different things too, so just know that the rejection, it is kind of like being an actor. The rejection is not personal. It's not that you suck or your work sucks. That's not it. It is not personal. It is part of this process. And like Christy said, I find that many agents do want the blood of your ancestors to deliver it on dove, on the full moon in a certain format. Like, sometimes too, you guys, it comes down to like lucky and being lucky and the right person at the right time seeing it. And sometimes, as unfair as it is, that's all it is.
Yeah, and I think just to add back on, like anything you can do to be involved in a writing community, whether it's local or statewide, like I got my agent because I was like the host of a Zoom conference for the Wisconsin Writers Association, which I volunteer for. And she was one of the speakers, and you could only query her if you were in the audience. Otherwise, she's closed to queries all year round. And it happened to be her that I had two agents, two offers of representation, and she's the one I picked, but I wouldn't have been able to query her if I weren't involved. So volunteer, write what you can. Somebody asked about literary magazines, and like, just go out and do it and try.
Good. And I'm just in the group chat, I'm laughing every time we mention the word dove is mentioned. Dominique laughs. So I was just watching that every time we said the dove letters. It was so funny. And I know we are running, I know we are running over, but I'm still around for questions. Any of the panelists, you know, if you're still around, you're welcome to hang, but I just wanted to be mindful in case anybody had to peel out, feel free to do so. But Kylie, if it's okay, are we okay to still tackle some questions? All right. Did you send some free copies of your books to certain groups? And if so, how was that received?
I once again harness the power of social media. There are a lot of people in this space of infertility, pregnancy, and infant loss. I sent copies of my book like before it came out to not like necessarily even huge influencers, like anyone that I had a connection with, anyone that I've been talking with, anyone that had like any kind of followers. Like sometimes the people who have 200 followers, they're the ones talking to those 200 people every single day. And so I sent them all copies of my book, and then all of them were on their social media talking about my book. I did a ton of Facebook and Instagram lives. I was giving my book away to people that were on there. I mean, anything I could do myself to get it out there, I was doing. And it helps to have a publisher because there is some PR that they're doing also. But I'd say the majority of my success has come from the things that I did, not necessarily that my publisher did, but definitely, I mean, use Facebook and use Instagram, because it's not like there's this traditional way of doing it. You know, you can really reach a lot of people on social media.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You never know who's gonna quite literally slide into your DMs and message you and just want to publish your book. I just love that story. Good. Yeah. So did anyone have an experience where they sent out copies and maybe were met with, you know, not negative feedback, but maybe they didn't love the book or they didn't provide an endorsement or blurb? And how did you process that?
I just wrote in the chat that I had the first chapter of my book printed like a little magazine, and I sent out like 100 of them to like every therapist, every hospital. Nobody contacted me back, not a single person.
Wow.
But also I wanted to say that once somebody asked me for a blurb, and I said, like, I'm very careful about who I agree to blurb, and I always want to read it first because it's like your name is on it. Anyway, I did not enjoy the book. And so I had to write her and say, like, I just want you to know, like, I will review your book if you want me to, but it's not going to be a 5-star review. And then she started accusing me of like using her for promotional purposes or something, and sending me like threatening emails about how she gave me 5 stars, but I didn't give her. And my advice is to be careful about that. Think carefully who you send your manuscript to. Try to have it be you know, somebody you know at least a little bit about. And then if you're ever on the receiving end, just be careful too, because, you know, people are people, I guess.
Yeah, and even if you have a connection with someone too, they just might not like your book, and that's okay. Again, like going in with that mindset that not everyone's gonna love your story, but that's okay. You're putting yourself out there, you're trying your best, and like that's all that matters. And it's better to try than not to try. So, I luckily was able to get a good amount of my endorsers to read and review, and even the ones that were like this one writer was pretty famous writer. I was like, oh, I don't know if I should do it, but I just went for it. I met him at a writers conference. Again, good things happen at writers conferences. But I went for it, and he read the book in 2 days and endorsed it. So you just never know. You know, making those genuine connections and just trying. But you know, being prepared if people don't like it, that's okay too. How do you protect your intellectual content as you start sharing? That's one of the questions there. So would anyone like to take a pass at protecting your writing before sharing? Like, what do you have to worry about?
You know, I haven't heard a lot of, I guess when you're sharing something that's not already published, you should make sure that you trust that person. You know, like if you're talking about like a critique group that you're a part of, or I mean, or your friends, I guess, if you're sharing your work with your friends, you should trust them. I mean, I'm sure that there are cases of people taking your work and trying to publish it as their own. I'm sure that there are. I just feel like, yeah, if it's not already published, just be cognizant of who you're sending it to. Make sure that you're like trading, right? I guess that would be my advice.
Yeah, good.
I had some concerns around that because I was self-publishing and I was working with people who were copy editing and they were freelance. So we had like an agreement or a contract that went along with that information and, you know, what the expectations were, and it went into that format. And I think that is always helpful if you have some kind of contract or agreement. Again, that was specifically for freelance copyright editing. So, you know, there was already going to be some type of agreement or contract in place. I think it's a little bit different when you know, are kind of passing your manuscript to someone to, you know, just to kind of take a look, or it may be in a group. But to the extent that you can put those things in place, I think that can be helpful.
I know because I had a lot of people sharing their stories with me in the book. I had contracts with everyone sharing their story. And then I was actually really protective of them because during the editing process, your editors come in and they just start slashing, you know, things. And I was always really protective. I'm like, you can edit my words, but my contract with these other women did not include you editing their words. Like, you can't change something that someone else has said in this book. So, you know, we left that as is. That was like very sacred to me. But yeah, we should maybe talk a little bit about like the editing process in the book. Like, your editor will come in and there will be lots of heated discussions sometimes because things that you think are really important, they're like, it doesn't really fit. We can just take the whole thing out. I'm like, no, that's a central story. Not really. And be prepared for that.
Okay. Wonderful. I saw someone had a question on a poetry manuscript, and Kylie, don't we have a poetry writer in our group? There's
someone who's doing, they might be finished, but there was like a 3-part poetry workshop this month.
Yeah, they might be a good contact for poetry questions. I don't think we have any. Is anyone a poet or okay, I was like, I think I read everyone's bio, but I just saw that. I wanted to note that Return to Zero does have a poetry writing session, and maybe that instructor might be able to help out and weigh in. I think that information's on the site. Well, good. I know we're running a little over. Kylie, should I hand it back to you to
Sure.
do the conclusion?
Well, Leah, thank you so much for facilitating this discussion. And Christy, Candace, and Dorienna, thank you for being here and your courage to be vulnerable, right? And share those excerpts of your book that I know can be challenging to read. It's like your innermost place. So thank you. And also for all the practical questions that we discussed today, because that's kind of, it is not just the writing of the book. It's so much more than that. So thank you. I appreciate your time. And we will have this up on YouTube and, early next week. So for those of you who did not watch it or you watched it and you want to share it with someone else, that will be there. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's stay in touch, Dorienna and Candace.
Absolutely.
Well,
I'm looking forward to
Yeah, I
some
was
new
like,
books.
ready to jump in. I'm like, I'm going to see your
Absolutely.
email thread no matter what.
Yes. I already have Candace's books, but
Yes.
it looks like I need to add a couple. So looking forward to the reads.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good
Bye.
weekend.